on the show. First, before asking you your view on the market, I wanted your view on how to approach these new age tech companies. It's a bit unpredictable, right, the show over there, because there are some that are on a path to profitability, some that look like they could be. But as an investor, how do you approach this space?
Good morning, Sonia. Clearly, this is not a homogeneous space, I would say. The valuations were definitely on the higher side when we started looking at some of these companies post-listing. And we also did see a global tech sector correcting a bit. And then in the past few months, we have seen a pullback in the global tech indices. So all of this has added to volatility in our internet companies as well. While the stock prices are much lower than where they got listed or where they started trading initially, the point here is one needs to evaluate all of these businesses on a bottom-up basis and see where is the path to profitability. Is it near in the near term, or it's in the medium to long term? I think if it is very long-term based path to profitability, then I think the volatility will remain high in such internet companies, given that the markets will also keep seeing cycles and you will keep seeing volatility driven by what's happening in the external environment. And another thing to note across many of these internet companies is the fact that there are many strategic investors and private equity investors who could be looking to exit at various points of time. So that is definitely a technical overhang that one needs to consider before investing in.
Okay. By the way, Harsha, just hold on to that thought. Paytm, it appears, there are far, that there is a larger number of trades that have got, have changed hands. Remember, for the last few days, Nimesh has been alerting us that there's likely to be a large trade out there, and one of those parties out there could be a seller. So let's see whether or not that happens. Nimesh will join in and just tell us in a bit. But that could explain why the stock is down close to around 5%. How much of it is done and how much of it is pending is something that we'll be looking forward to. But Harsha, good to hear your opinion on these new age companies. What about the IT stocks? They have actually bounced well from the recent lows. But now how much of that, the recovery is already priced in? Would you look at them now, or do you believe there's still a spot of bother? Valuation-wise, well, they're not very cheap. And the globe could hit a recessionary phase. So in that sort of a backdrop, your approach?
Nigel, we don't have a great overweight stance on IT sector as of now. It will be a bit of an underweight or a neutral at this point of time, and our preference is for large cap IT companies. As you mentioned clearly, the global growth seems still a question mark. So in that scenario, what happens to 2023 IT discretionary budget is something that we need to see, and that's what is going to get executed over the next 12-18 months. So from that perspective, we could still see a bit of issues on the business side, while valuations have seen kind of a decent correction. So to that extent, I would say that there is probably no valuation risk there. But the question is about when do you see global growth recovering and helping business momentum.
Harsha, morning. What are the notable trends that you've picked up on consumption this time from the earnings season? And does it change your portfolio allocation in any way?
Rima, clearly that's one of the areas where we have seen significant hits in terms of margins as well as how they have delivered profits vis-a-vis expectations. I think the entire consumer discretionary part has kind of disappointed the markets. While something was expected, because not every company was expected to improve its margins or improve its overall growth. But I think the actual delivery has been much lower than the expectations. And it's still baffling to us how sharply we have seen urban discretionary consumption going down across many segments in the last few months post festive season. So it remains to be seen what happens in terms of recovery in urban consumption. Whereas on the rural consumption, we are kind of becoming constructive at this point of time. We believe that over the next 6 to 12 months, we could see revival in rural consumption. And that should also come at a point of time where the margins should improve for most of these companies, given how commodity prices have been moderating over the last couple of months. So overall, I think maybe if you are a patient investor, there is money to be made in this segment. But I think the immediate short term is still going to be a question mark for consumer discretionary.
Okay, by the way, this market is in a mood to punish a lot of weak numbers. So Zomato is now down almost about 6% and huge volumes being traded on Zomato this morning. It's clearly the biggest volume buzzer on the downside. Paytm on the back of the block is down about 4% odd. Lupin is down 4.5% despite numbers being largely in line with estimates. It was only the profits that were below street estimates. Despite that, Lupin is down. United Breweries and Voltas, a couple of other stocks that have disappointed on numbers, and both those names are in the red. And Brigade Enterprises also down almost about 2.5% odd. We'll have a chat with the management in just a bit as well. Harsha, what do you do with some of these names? I mean, if you look at the consumption space on the whole, there's been a clear slowdown this time around. Whether you talk about the HULs of the world, whether you talk about Asian Paints, a lot of the consumer durable companies have indicated a slowdown. Voltas, they've halved their EBITDA. Are you noticing any trend here? And if yes, what would it be? And from an investment standpoint, what do you do?
Yeah, clearly, the entire consumer discretionary pack, as I discussed earlier, is showing margin pressure, as well as the growth has not been up to expectations. Things are still not very clear in terms of how growth is going to revive immediately. So from that perspective, I think next couple of quarters could still be kind of muted. And also another point to remember here is most of these consumer discretionary stocks are at a valuation which are much higher than the market multiples. So to that extent, in a richly valued sector, if there are growth disappointments or margin disappointments, then there could be a significant fall in stock prices or underperformance against the index. So to that extent, immediate short term looks difficult for consumer discretionary space. However, if you are a patient investor, maybe the volatility that you are going to see over the next couple of quarters could be the time to really look at adding some of these names, because these are all really good businesses which have compounded earnings over a period of time. Yes, today they are in a spot, but those issues should gradually improve. For example, the margin story should improve quite a bit. And also we expect growth to revive at some point of time during the year. So maybe there is a time to build some of these positions as you go ahead if volatility continues.
Harsha, you said you're baffled by the extent of slowdown that we've seen in urban consumption, urban consumer discretionary. What explains this kind of decline? Is it just inflation? Is it just pent-up demand, which is now spent demand?
Difficult to say at this point of time, but clearly I think a large part of demand that we saw during festive season or in the run-up to festive season was probably a kind of pent-up demand as the market was reopening after COVID disruption, looks like. Because there is no other reason which can explain the kind of slowdown that we have seen post-festive season. If that is the case, maybe at some point of time it should get readjusted and we should come back to normal growth scenario. That's what we hope over the next few quarters. We should see some amount of revival in consumer discretionary as well.
Okay, all right, Harsha, always good hearing your thoughts. Thanks so much for stopping by and giving us your view on a whole host of sectors that we just discussed. Well, by the way, the Nifty Bank, that's going to be the joker in the pack today.